Today we're going to talk about probably the most controversial topic in international business, job outsourcing. Many people are angry about job outsourcing, and if it was in their power, they would just make it illegal. Some people seem to not care at all. There seem to be at least some people who like it. But one thing is definitely true, and that is that most people have no idea what job outsourcing is, what it does, how it works, who wins and who loses in the process. This is one of those issues that we kind of know about from political advertisement and maybe from some personal experience based on a few cases that you saw. You personally were laid off presumably because of job outsourcing, or your friend lost a job because of that. But this is also one of the most studied topics in economics. There have been literally thousands of studies, empirical studies on the effects of job outsourcing. And so while the economists know a lot about it, and there is lots of empirical evidence and pros and cons of job outsourcing, most people have never ever read any of that evidence, any of that literature, and instead just rely on kind of common sense and what others say. And unfortunately, this often leads to wrong conclusions and wrong policy support. Before we get into this, I would like to emphasize two things. One, this issue is not discussed in the textbook, even though that's probably the most important issue in international business. The chapter on international trade pretty much omits the issue of job outsourcing. Second, when we say job outsourcing, what effectively we talk about is imports, right? Because if you had a job here and the product was bought here and you outsourced the job or the production facility overseas, that means that somebody else makes it there and brings it here. So when we talk about job outsourcing, to a large extent we're talking about imports, right? It's just a little clarification. All right, first today's puzzler. A landscaper returns home after work and is sitting with his family at the dinner table. And his kid asks him, "Daddy, what did you do today? Did you work hard?" And he says, "Oh yes, I worked very hard. I was planting trees all day. In fact, I planted 5 rows of trees with 4 trees in each row." And his kid, trying to impress his daddy with the kid's newly acquired multiplication skills, says, "Oh, that's 20 trees, Daddy." And he says, "No, it's not 20 trees. I planted only 10 trees. Now his wife looks puzzled at him and says, "Hold on a second. 5 rows of trees, 4 trees in each row, that must be 20. And the guy says, "No, it was only 10 trees in my case." The puzzler is, or the question is, how is that possible? Now, before we get into the theory and all, that knowledge and pros and cons, I want to ask you a few questions. And it really works well when I have 150 students in the classroom. But I encourage you to write down your own answers, and even though, again, you will not be able to see what other people answer those questions like, at least you will know what your answer was to each question. And I'll give you the statistics on what kinds of answers I see normally in my classes. So question number 1, what fraction of U.S. consumer spending should go for goods labeled made in the USA? In other words, every dollar that is spent in the United States, in your personal opinion, what percentage, how many cents out of that dollar should go to products labeled made in the USA? In other words, how much of what you spend should go for products made overseas versus those made in the United States. Just write down your number, and I'll give you the numbers that I normally hear in a few minutes. Now, obviously, the opposite of it, what fraction of the U.S. consumer spending should go for goods that are not made in the United States, which would be obviously 1 minus the fraction that you specified in the first question. So if you believe that, for example, let's say 80% of all American spending should go for products made in the United States, then here it would be 20%. If you thought that half of what Americans spend should be for American-made goods and half for foreign-made goods, then it would be 50-50, right? Now, I'm going to single out China here just because, China is now seen as the main importer into the United States and the main threat. And so when we say job outsourcing, in most cases we kind of think China. So I'm going to ask you, what fraction of US consumer spending should go for goods labeled made in China? So specifically not just overseas goods, not German, Japanese, Korean, but specifically Chinese. And again, here I'm asking about should. So if you were God Almighty or the president of the country or someone with the power to regulate those numbers, what numbers would you impose? Or in other words, or let's say you cannot change it, but at least you wish that's what it was. So write down those numbers, and I'll give you the statistics. Normally, from what I see in my classes, and as I said, it's usually close to 200 students every semester, most students would converge, or the answers would converge around the numbers 60% for American-made goods, 40% for foreign-made goods. Of those 40%, about half, or about 20% for Chinese-made goods, and the other 20% for goods made overseas. Now, so that's what we want, right? Now let me ask you if you know what really is. So I'm going to ask you how the situation is now. I mean, we all cry out loudly that we want less outsourcing or more outsourcing, but first let's check if we actually know what's going on. Maybe it's much worse than we think, or maybe it's actually much better, who knows? So let's check if you know the answers, and in a few minutes I'll give you the actual answers. So one, what fraction of US consumer spending goes for goods labeled made in the United States? So in other words, for every dollar you spend, or American consumers spend, you earn some money, you come home with your paycheck, and then the whole month you spend money. So you pay all kinds of stuff, you buy stuff, whatever you spend money on, right? So of that dollar, each dollar that you spend, how much goes for goods labeled made in the United States? All right, write down that number. Now, how much do you think you spend on goods made not in the United States? All right. And now, how much or what fraction of your spending you spend on goods labeled made in China? And I say labeled because you understand that some components may be from other countries, but basically made in China things. All right. Okay, and so you got your numbers. I strongly encourage you to write down those numbers because it's very important that you compare your answers to those that are real answers, and so you will be surprised. But again, here are the numbers that I normally get. Usually people say that they probably spend about 30% of their income on products made in China, about 70% of their income on products that are not made in the United States, and of those 70% of spendings that are spent on products not made in the United States, about 2/3 goes to products made in China. So it would be roughly 40–45% of all spendings go to products made in China. So now let me give you the actual answers, and I'm not sure if you personally will be surprised. But as I said, in a class of 200, usually 95% of the students like, what? Really? And so the reality is such that 88.5% of all money spent in the United States, consumer spending, so not buying shares, buying things that you need for your life, 88.5% you spend on American products. Many people are like, what? Really? I thought it was all Chinese. No, it's not all Chinese. Pretty much all food that you buy is American. Just about everything related to your housing is American. Construction equipment is American. Tools are American. Your rent and other things that you spend on your life are American. So actually you spend almost 90% of your consumer income. So whatever you earn of that, about 90% you spend actually on products made in the United States. Now, about 11.5% is spent on products that are labeled not made in the United States. But as you imagine, when you pay $10 for something that you buy at the store, like for example this alarm watch, well, you can see it here, of that $10, not all $10 actually goes to the overseas company. Part of it would be salary of an American retail personnel. Part of it would be for logistics, basically moving that product from, let's say, China to the United States. And in many cases, that would be an American logistics company. So transportation, advertisement, bookkeeping, all that stuff. So the actual amount of money that goes to foreign jurisdictions is 7.3%. So of every dollar you spend, only 7.3 cents go to foreign companies. The other, as I said, 4.2 of the 11.5% are the money that you spend send to American companies that make sure that those products can come from the overseas, so transportation, bookkeeping, advertising, all that stuff. Now, talking specifically about the Chinese goods, the statistics amazingly is that you spend only 2.7% of your income on products labeled made in China. And again, if you subtract from that retailing cost, transportation cost, bookkeeping cost, it's actually going to be 1.9% of your spending. So of each dollar, it's only 2% that goes to China, because your phone bill, your insurance bill, your rent, your food, many bigger things that are bought in the United States, those like cars, for example, those would not be made in China. So it's actually a fairly small percentage. And yes, it is true. When you come to Walmart, it seems like just about everything you buy there is made in China. But again, what percentage of your income do you actually spend on Walmart? You know, from your haircut to your gym membership to your, as I said, food and many other items that you buy. Most of those are American, inherently American. So if you were like most and you said that you wish Americans spent 40% of their income on foreign-made goods, and of those 40%, 20% of their income would be going to China, you actually would have made the problem 10 times worse than it is now. So before you fight something, check where we are, because there is a very, very good chance the situation is much, much better than you think it is. And again, I'm not sure about you personally, but when I have Chinese students in the classroom, about 95% would vote for making the situation much, much worse. If you don't like job outsourcing, they would actually vote to make it 10 times worse, or they would vote for 10 times as much imports from China than what really is. So do your math first before you advocate some policies.
Increasingly, American parents are spending more time at work and less time at home. With the cost of nannies on the rise, many are turning to a new solution to their child care dilemma. Susan and Mark Andelman of Portland, Oregon, started sending their son Timothy to a daycare facility in India 4 months ago.
Oh, it used to be quite a hassle in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Now sometimes I'm even able to just get them right into the box without even waking them up, so it's a lot easier.
Outsourcing Timothy worked so well, they decided to send their 3-week-old daughter Brittany to infant care in Sri Lanka. Though the wages earned by overseas child care workers would seem low to Americans, in countries like India, they are over 1 billion times the average salary.
It's only 12 cents an hour in India, which is a lot cheaper than $300 I was paying a week here in the United States.
It's a big improvement.
Yeah.
Before he was acting out, a lot of yelling and screaming. Now, when we uncrate him, he's completely quiet.
Yeah, for like 2 or 3 days.
The system is not without its problems, however. In June, Patricia Nattings of Omaha, Nebraska, incorrectly wrote her zip code, causing little Kimberly Nattings to spend nearly 3 weeks lost in the mail.
I have to eat my own fingers.
Coming up next, are there bullets in your body? Stay with us, we'll be right back.
Hi, I hope you understood that this report was just a joke from the Onion Network. Anyway, when we talk about international job outsourcing, it's very important to answer these basic questions, or these are the questions that we should answer in this lecture. First, what are the benefits of outsourcing job overseas? Who benefits in the home and host country? And who loses, very importantly, who loses in home and host countries? All right, so let's discuss them one by one. First, there are two basic views on job outsourcing. There are some people who just hate it, and they say that job outsourcing is basically creating jobs over there and not over here. So an import from China, that's a job created in China which could have been created in the United States. So made in there means could have been made here, but some evil person outsourced the job over there. On the other hand, there are some people who support job outsourcing, or those who support, their argument is, well, job outsourcing makes products cheaper, and every time you save a few dollars on a thing or two, you have more dollars left in your pocket. more dollars left in your pocket means that you have more dollars to spend on something else. Maybe remodel your kitchen, maybe get a new haircut, maybe buy a new car made in the United States. So the job outsourcing saves us money, and by saving us money, it leaves us more money to buy other American products. So rather than killing jobs here, it allows to move some jobs there while allowing us to spend more money on products that create jobs here. Now, the problem is that when we talk about job outsourcing, this is normally how the topic is presented to us. Here is an example of a political ad that is just about the only education we get about job outsourcing.
The truth about Dick DeVos and China? September 6th. Finally, Dick DeVos admitted he cut Michigan jobs and created jobs in China. Fact. As president of Amway, he laid off nearly 1,400 Michigan workers. Fact. He invested $200 million in China. Fact. He built a factory there and created thousands of jobs for China. Is that what Michigan needs? Dick DeVos. The more you know, the worse it gets.
Now, I'm not a big fan of job outsourcing, and I will talk about many negative effects it creates in the United States. But when you look at this political ad that I just showed you, it's presented in a spooky, way. Dick DeVos, the bad guy, he outsources our jobs. It's a very one-sided, very dramatic type of presentation of the topic. And so, unfortunately, in most cases, this is the only way people hear about job outsourcing. And while there is some truth to this ad, the story is much, much more complex, and there is definitely much more that needs to be said about the topic, including in the positive light when we talk about it. Now, here's another video that also kind of shows the positive side of job outsourcing. And again, this one comes from a movie, and so unless you've seen it, you probably haven't thought about job outsourcing that way. Let me show it to you.
Thanks. Hello?
You gotta be kidding me. I'm buying a freaking American Eagle from a company that is supposed to be in America, and I get India?
I understand that you're upset, sir.
No, you don't. You don't understand. Last month, I lost my job at the plant where I worked for 22 years because the whole operation moved to Mexico. My brother had to leave town because there are no jobs.
I know how you feel, sir.
No, you don't. You have a job.
Sir, please don't hang up. I have a solution for you.
What?
See, we understand that many Americans are upset about outsourcing, so we have located American-made versions of all our products. If you have a pen, I will give you the website of an American company that makes an eagle statue very similar to ours. Same size, same materials, only theirs is made 100% in America.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it, but is the price about the same?
No, sir. Theirs is $212 more. Sir?
Yeah, all right. Just tell me yours.
Thank you, sir. May I have your credit card number?
Now, many people can say that this second video with the cheaper, non-American made eagle stature shows an unwise American who is willing to sell his country for a few extra bucks. And what many people don't see here is that the foundation of American economy or American philosophy is that the individual knows better than the government. And this individual here in the video, as well as each one of you when you go to a store, you make decisions wisely, or at least if you believe in freedom of choice, you probably would agree with me that you are not stupid. So when you come to a store and you look at different products on the shelves, you make the choice based on what works best for you individually, right? So, and if that choice is an American-based or a Chinese-made product, then whatever your decision is, you have the right to make that decision and you do what's best for you. And so when every single individual makes what's best for him personally, it actually leads to a stronger economy overall. Because surprisingly, those people who believe in America often would say that, well, maybe government should intervene and maybe impose import tariffs on, for example, Chinese-made goods. Well, if you believe in that it's not the American way, it's the Soviet way, where the government tells you what to do. Because the government believes that if you let your people choose what they want to buy, based on the analysis of quality and price and visual appeal, they will make a wrong choice. They will make a choice that is not good for America. And again, I'm telling you, if you believe in American free way, you should allow people make those choices. And maybe those will not be such bad choices. Like, for example, in this specific, again, joke video, but there is some truth to it. Well, the dude will save, what, about $212 on that particular purchase. That's $212 that he can now spend on something else, maybe on an American product, a product that he wouldn't be able to buy otherwise had he bought an American-bought eagle statue. So if there was a law in place that would prevent him from buying that Indian-made or whatever country China-made product, the guy would have benefited the American eagle statue makers, but at the expense of other American producers that wouldn't get his order because he just wouldn't have any money left. And so those who are prone to imposing barriers and trying to save American economy by building fences, they don't recognize that they will not save the economy. They will save a specific interest group at the expense of other groups in the United States, including just about every single consumer. So again, I'm not really saying that job outsourcing is good. I'm saying that the free choice is good. And if you leave those choices up to the individual consumers, that will actually benefit the economy potentially more, because the resources will be redistributed more effectively. But again, that's in very general terms. We'll get into more details in a few minutes. Now, here's another question. Is cheap the problem? Nobody seems to have problem with job outsourcing to, for example, Germany. Nobody seems to be on the streets protesting against BMWs and Mercedeses. People seem to be fine with buying products from those countries because the labor cost there is about the same as in the United States. So why would you worry? They're not stealing our jobs, they're just selling us products, right? What we are concerned about are the jobs going to low-wage countries like China, like India, like, for example, Ukraine, you name it. So that's where we see the threat. Cheap products, that's what we see the problem. Now, let's think about it for a while, and let's think if that really is a problem. I'm going to run an experiment. I'm actually conducting a study now, and I have collected about 1,000 responses already. But I'm going to tell you how it goes. Unfortunately, I can't poll you because you're not in the same room. But I'm going to ask you those questions, and again, I encourage you to write down your answers, and then you will compare them with what the rest of the class says. And then again, ideally, I want to have a conversation about that, but I'll just tell you how those conversations normally go. So, imagine this situation. You know this guy here, right? Tony Robbins, right? So the personal life coach and all kinds guy. He was playing himself in the movie called Shallow Hal. If you've seen that movie, that's the guy who hypnotized Shallow Hal in the elevator into seeing the inner beauty of the women, right? So, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I just obviously made up this story. So there is a guy, for example, who is a true American patriot. And he is very concerned about Americans hurting in this economic condition, or these economic conditions, these dire economic times. He looks at all those students sitting right in front of these computers and he thinks, poor kids. I mean, America is not doing so well economically the last few years. I'm going to help them. I know all these kids from school, they like, or people in general like, for example, Apple products. Apple MacBook Pros and iPads and iPhones. Those are good products. There are lots of apps on them that make your life easier. They improve your productivity. So I'm going to help them in ways I can. For example, I'll maybe try to get those products to these people cheaper. And so he goes to Foxconn, to the biggest factories in China, biggest employer in China, the Foxconn factory that makes Apple products. He comes there and he does his hypnosis, and he says, from now on you will love America so much that you will be making all those products for America for free, so that Americans don't have to pay for your products, so that Americans will get your products, Apple products, for free, so that they can save some money and maybe get the products they wouldn't be able to afford otherwise. And voila, all these factory workers fall in love with America so much that from now on they work completely for free and make your iPhones, your cell phones, your Apple computers, your Apple TV completely free. Now, the question is it good for you personally? Is it good for America? So would you like a free, do you think it would be a good thing if you were given a free Apple computer? I don't know what you personally think here, but about 99% of the students in my classroom normally would say, sure, yeah, that would be a good thing. I could save a few dollars. I could use a free computer. There is always one or two smarty pants who say, oh no, that's bad, that will make us lazy. But again, face it, I mean, that's a good thing. I would like a free computer from Apple. You probably would like one, and it will make mine and your life better. And again, what's well-being of America? That's well-being of each individual. Now, moving on. The hypnosis wears out over time, and now the Chinese workers still love America so much that they're willing to work almost for free, but not quite for free. So they say, from now on, we're going to charge 1 cent for an iPad. The question is, at 1 cent per unit, is it still good for America or bad for America? And again, write down your answer, but normally in my class, most students say, sure, yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, 1 cent, that's better than, whatever they charge, and it's definitely beneficial. How about 10 cents? And over time, another week later, they think, well, maybe we should charge $1. How about $10? How about $50? How about $500? How about $1,000? Now, here's what normally happens in the classroom when I ask those questions this way. While the price is fairly low, people are nodding and saying, yeah, it's good. But when the price reaches a few $100s and kind of reaches the market value, people say, yeah, I'm not sure if it's helping America much. And then when the price goes above the market value, people say, oh, no, that's bad. That's, now it's hurting America. What's the point of this exercise? The point here is that I framed the issue of products from China not in the light of imports, but as basically a gift or a result of a patriotic American making those Chinese to work and make the products for you for free. When you remove all that emotional stuff from the equation, when you don't use the word job outsourcing and imports and you phrase it more products for this much, people all of a sudden become much more rational and they think, yeah, I guess cheaper would be better, or free, that would be best. And only when the price goes up too much, that's when they say, no, that doesn't make any sense. What bothers me though, that once you add outsourcing to the question, plug in that word there, people completely, not just slightly change their opinion, they completely reverse their opinion. They say, oh yeah, expensive products from Germany, fine. Cheap products from China, bad. And it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if it's really bad, it shouldn't matter if it's a gift or if it's an import from that country. And so that's the point. So when we talk about job outsourcing, in most cases we become overly emotional. Sometimes it's the emotion of fear, sometimes it's the, envy, maybe some other strong emotions. And so as a result, we don't really think about the economic effects. We think only purely about, all those patriotic, political / emotional things. And again, there may be some truth to that. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying that if you want to know how imports, including cheap imports, impact American economy, you have to think here, not here, because when you think here, you completely mess up your logic. And so I hope this past exercise illustrated it to you. All right? Now, here is your first hint for the puzzler. Think outside the box. Think outside the box. The lines don't have to be parallel. All right? Now, job outsourcing, is it really bad? Again, there are many downsides of job outsourcing and we'll talk about more of them, but let me give you another example that brings the issue in a completely new light. I frankly still don't know what to make out of it, so I'm going to tell you the story and I will let you make the decision for yourself. But this one definitely presents it in a, I would even say, controversial light. So here is the story. Some 10 years ago, I was a master's student at that time, or maybe a PhD student. A very interesting thing happened in the Silicon Valley. A dude was randomly selected by the IRS for audit for his taxes, and they noticed something very strange in his tax return files. The guy claimed that he had 7 full-time jobs, making roughly $100,000 in each of them. He paid the taxes, everything was fine, But I mean, 7 full-time jobs, that's, even if you don't sleep, that would be what, 3 full-time jobs, not 7. Something didn't match. And so they started keeping or digging deeper. And what they found was that the guy worked as a programmer for 7 different companies. And as it happens in many programming jobs, the people are not really sitting in their cubicles. They, in many cases, work from home. And in simple terms, the way the correspondence or interaction happens is they receive an assignment from their boss in the morning or once a week, who knows how often. They work on it from home. When the work is done, they send the work to their boss. They sometimes collaborate with others online, and basically never really see the company. And so they just, as long as they do the job, it's known how much time it takes. They can be on a full payroll. Just, there is no need to commute every morning to work. What this guy did was every morning when he receives his assignment, he would simply forward it by email to a guy in India, and that guy in India would do his work. On average, he had 7 to 10 people in India working for him, each making about $15,000. So basically what the guy was doing, he was outsourcing jobs and making $85,000 on each head or job without really doing any programming job. So his job was to outsource effectively. Now the IRS didn't know what to do about that because, everything seems fine. I mean, there is nothing illegal about hiring Indians to do the job. He paid the taxes. The little problem here was that he never informed his employers that somebody else was doing his job. But again, that was not really the IRS's jurisdiction to decide. So they did inform the employers though, and out of 7, 6 fired the guy. So they felt that he was basically stealing from the company. He signed up to work as a programmer, and all he was doing was forwarding the tasks and then the results of the work. Now, the job was done well, so they were happy with that. They didn't like the fact that he basically was stealing from the company or using company resources to make some money that he was not supposed to make, or whatever you want to decide. Now, if I were to ask you, how would you reflect on this experience? Would you say it was a good thing that the guy did or a bad thing? If you were his manager, what would you say? Or if you were his friend, what would you say? This is one of those few cases that when I talk about them in class, most students don't even know how to respond. I mean, in the previous cases or questions that I asked, students would have some opinions. Here they say like, oh, I don't know. It does seem like lying on the one hand. On the other hand, he actually did the job, so he delivered what he's paid for, so why would you care how he did it? What bothers me here is that on the one hand, the guy may be perceived as the evil. He outsources American jobs, he's bad. On the other hand, he's actually the greatest patriot. He kept 7 full-time jobs, well-paid jobs in America. So effectively, all that money stayed in America. It didn't go to China or India. He basically kept those jobs here, if you look at that. And so somehow we still don't want to sing songs to him because he doesn't seem to be, doing a patriotic thing. So what bothers us here is that on the one hand, the jobs are here on the paper. On the other hand, we kind of don't like him because, he's taken money that he didn't really earn. And maybe if the jobs were outsourced in the first place, maybe the products that he delivers, that he works on, would have been cheaper for us. And so again, I don't know what to make out of it, but I hope you recognize that simply artificially keeping jobs here and paying more for the job just for the sake of keeping them in America is probably not a solution to the job. So anyway, if you Google this story, you can find a lot of interesting information about that case, but I thought it brings a very interesting perspective on the issue. What I would like to talk about is the effects of job outsourcing on employment or unemployment in the United States. Most people are not entirely against products from China. What they worry about that every time you buy from China, that's a job that could have been created in the United States, and presumably the more we buy from China, the more jobs we lose in the United States. Well, let's look at the empirical evidence. And the empirical evidence in this case, probably the best piece of evidence would be, well, let's see at how much we buy from China, and then let's see what unemployment in the United States is. And so this graph here, obviously for you here, is not the real graph. I should have copied the picture, but basically reproduced it using, simple drawing tool. But here's what you will see when you look at this graph. You will see that imports from China pretty much double every 5 years for the last 25 years. So every year we buy more and more and more and more from China since the 70s, or more from 80s, or imports in general. In this case, it's not actually China only, it's imports in general. At the same time, when you look at unemployment, you will see that unemployment over the last 100 years or so in the United States has been fairly stable, roughly fluctuating around 5–6%. And yes, it is true that in the recent years, unemployment ticked up all the way to 9%. But the funny thing is that that was the time when imports actually went down. So if you believe that imports cause unemployment, then what you should have seen in the last 5 years or 4 years should have seen a drastic drop in unemployment, because imports in the last several years with the recession went dramatically down. We bought less from China last several years than before. Yet unemployment actually went up. And again, those of you who are smart, those of you know that the two were the consequence of the economic recession. But that's the point. Imports have no direct effect on unemployment. And if anything, when you look at this graph, well, there is really no positive relation either. One is going up stably, constantly and predictably. The other one, unemployment, stays pretty much the same. And as I said, if you look at this last part, you can actually say that there is a negative correlation. The more the imports, the actual lower unemployment. But that, again, is not true. And yes, here we're talking about imports as a percent of GDP. So that wasn't just the total dollars. It's adjusted for the size of the economy. And so as the size of the economy, imports have been growing very, very rapidly. But at the same time, unemployment didn't seem to have been affected. The point of this graph, by the way, is that we are fighting the wrong enemy. If we were able to ban all the imports tomorrow, it wouldn't create jobs in the United States. But more on that in a few minutes. Here is your first question. Let's make sure that you've been listening to me. And the answer is, you have the picture here as a little hint. I often include pictures like this one from the slide without the words in the question so that you can make a reference in your head to where the question comes from. But the answer is E. The correlation between imports and unemployment is effectively zero. One does not affect the other. Now, what's very important when we talk about imports or before we get into what effects imports have on America, it's very important to first discuss what is America, what constitutes America, who are Americans. And unfortunately, in many cases when we talk about international trade and job outsourcing, when we say America, we usually mean blue-collar workers apparently, right? But the thing is that America is more than just factory workers. America is also owners of the factories, entrepreneurs. Consider, for example, the baddest outsourcers like Apple, Nike, HP, Dell, GM, Ford. Those are American icons, and they actually outsource just about most of their production overseas. But again, people who invest in those companies, including you perhaps, people who work for those companies as marketing specialists, as accountants, as designers, as software engineers, those are also Americans. All those engineers, white-collar workers, as I said, owners, entrepreneurs, all those too are Americans. And so the point here is that, yes, is it good or bad that iPods, for example, are made in China? Well, some may say that it's bad because there are factory workers in the United States that could have made that job or done that job here, and it would have been better for America. But let me ask you this. How much an iPad would cost if it was made in the United States? That's question one. Question two, if it was more expensive, as it would likely be, would Apple be able to sell so many computers or iPods, iPads globally? Obviously not. If Apple were not able to sell so many computers globally, would it be better for Apple? And again, probably not. And if Apple is hurt, would America really be better off? I don't think so. I mean, in fact, GM seems to have gone through all this crisis, as well as Ford, due to their huge international operations. While they were in problem and trouble here in the United States, they seem to have done very well in other countries. And so if they were not able to outsource their production to, for example, Mexico and China and other countries, they probably would have been bankrupt by now. And there was once a saying, what's good for GM is good for America. Well, I believe that is still true. I mean, America is not only factory workers, but also that same company, GM, and so on and so on. Now, many of you probably have heard about that recent lunch, not recent actually, 2 years ago, that was attended by Steve Jobs and Obama. And when Obama specifically asked, Steve, what would it take you to start making iPads in the United States? And Steve Jobs said, it's impossible. It will never happen. And he said it's not even about the price. It's also about the logistics, about the infrastructure, about the even work ethics. He said, for example, when they were making iPhone 5 or 4 at that time, I believe, they had to change some design, and it was like 2 weeks before the cell phones went into production. And so Foxconn woke up 1 point something million people basically in the middle of the night and put them to work, so that by the morning they already had quite a few million units ready. And he says it's just impossible to do in the United States, so it would be much more expensive here. But it's not only about money, it's also about differences in skills. We, the Americans, can make the best software, for example. We do wonderful design, but the actual assembly, those guys there in China seem to be actually better at it, much cheaper, but also at the same time now better, and they have that skill set that is needed for that. So again, if you believe that Apple, Nike, HP are part of America, then think twice before you advocate banning the imports, because those companies, including their engineers, accountants, marketing people, investors, will go down with the companies. Would that be better for America? You decide. Now, let's look at some of the baddest job outsourcers, like for example, Apple. According to a report from a year ago, an Apple's employee would generate about $500,000 in profits for the company per employee. Now, as you know, there are literally millions of people making those Apple products, but Apple actually employs only 40,000 people itself. The rest of the employees, or people who make Apple products, are those of the companies that Apple outsourced production to, for example, Foxconn in China. And so of those 40,000 employees in the United States, most of them don't assemble your iPods. In fact, none of them assembled your iPods. But because they outsourced all that labor-intensive, presumably less important stuff, that the remaining employees can now generate tremendous value for the company as well as for themselves. I imagine that with this much money generated for the company, their salaries are also fairly substantial. Now, the question is it good or bad for America? You know, the situation is not very different at Nike or GM or just about any other big company, Google, and so on and so on. Suspect many people would think that it's a bad thing because, all those millions of jobs could have been in the United States. On the other hand, let's take it to an extreme. Let's imagine that all the jobs in America are from companies that are like Nike or Apple in the design business. Companies that design your iPads and outsource the polluted, dirty production to other countries. And those who stay here are intellectuals who work hard to make lots of money using their brains and not necessarily hands. I don't think that would be such a bad future. Obviously, again, not everyone is born to be an Apple engineer, right? And at the same time, at this time, there are many people without jobs, and probably it wouldn't be such a bad thing if they were making Apple iPods or iPads or computers. So probably it would be better than what they have now. But again, by being able to outsource those unessential labor-intensive parts of the production process, these companies can generate much more value. And I don't think I would be willing to force them to take on all those less profitable functions and take care of that stuff, because I know that that will hurt the company overall. I don't see a huge problem with the approach Apple, Nike, and other companies use. Again, America is more than just factory workers, more than just blue-collar workers. It's also company owners, entrepreneurs, engineers, and all those other folks that maybe we here in the United States should love more. Now, so how come do we hear so much about the negative consequences of job outsourcing and so little about positive consequences? How come we hear so many complaints, people protesting on the streets all the time and engaging in different rallies? How come we don't hear the other side of the story? Well, the problem is that it's very much a psychological thing. Throughout the course of the evolution, we humans have evolved or developed, or if you believe in creationism, then the Creator created us in such a way that for us, losses always loom larger than gains. So many studies have shown that we would do much, much more to avoid losses and will be much, much more vocal about the losses than we would do to incur those gains, comparable gains in terms of the amount, or talk about the gains. So somehow we are much more prone to complain and be afraid of losses than to work for gains and talk about gains. In other words, it's very likely that you can see a sign like this or a picture like this here. So it's very likely that you can see a guy with a banner that says NAFTA kills jobs. Maybe he lost the job, or maybe somebody he knows lost a job. It's very likely to see that. But on the other hand, it would be extremely unlikely to see the same guy with a sign or poster that says, I saved $5,000 on my Mexican-made Chevy Silverado. Both effects are extremely important. I mean, $5,000 on a single truck, which is roughly, by the way, what the savings are, because the trucks, Chevy Silverados, are made in Mexico, and the cost of labor is much lower there, so the cost of making that truck is about $5,000 less, and as a result, the price is that much less. And so if this guy saved $5,000, it would be a very important positive economic outcome, because now he would have extra $5,000 to maybe, I don't know, hire someone to remodel his kitchen or buy other types of products that would create demand and therefore jobs in the United States. So we cannot say that this effect, this one, is stronger than this effect. It's just this one is negative and this one is positive, but the effect is roughly the same. The point here is that we are much more likely to complain about this and see people complaining about this, but much less likely to see this and people bragging about the gains that they've experienced. In fact, I guess in some parts of the country, the guy was walking on the streets with a sign that says, I saved $5,000 in my Mexican-made Chevy Silverado. He can be really beat up. So, but anyway, you got the idea, right? Now, so we talked about so far the often overlooked positive effects of free trade, positive effects of, if you will, imports and job outsourcing. But don't take me wrong, I definitely recognize the negatives of job outsourcing, and I definitely see some positives in supporting your own industries and protectionist measures. Not always, in fact, almost never, but sometimes it actually makes sense to come as a government, as the big brother, and say, no, 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 you can't buy the Chinese-made product, you have to buy American. And again, even though that's what many people advocate, generally that's a bad policy. The economics shows that it's a bad idea, but sometimes it actually may be a good idea. And so here are some examples of that makes sense, that makes sense. One, that's when you support your own industries at the expense or by the means of imposing barriers on imports from overseas, when the products we are talking about is representing so-called infant industries in your own country. So for example, your country is trying to develop a new technology, whatever new technology you believe the country should develop. Let's say electric vehicles. Let's say, and again, you don't have to believe it, in fact, I'm not even sure if I believe it, but let's say we believe that electric vehicles is the way to go. We know that it's going to be the future. So while we don't have that capability at this time, and China, by the way, already has, it may be a good idea to support electrical vehicle makers here in the United States by, for example, reducing quotas for imported electrical vehicles from overseas. Or if you believe in whatever other products, solar panels, or maybe, I don't know, natural gas, or whatever else. It doesn't have to be about cars. If your own industry at this time is not as developed as that of other countries, it may be a good idea to provide those protectionist measures for a few years until your industry becomes strong enough and is able to compete in the wild. Just like with the kids, you know, we protect them for 18 years, we feed them, we dress them, we educate them, so that one day when they're older, we just let them go and then, you know, survive on their own in the wild. The same thing if you have industries that need to go through restructuring. And I'm going to use again auto industry here because we had a recent successful example. GM and Chrysler, as you know, were on the brink of bankruptcy in 2008. And even though the government didn't really impose many protectionist measures as far as banning imports of cars from the overseas, the government did support those two companies through the what was called TARF money, right? And so the experience shows that the companies like GM, Chrysler, they're stronger than ever now. They did go successfully through restructuring. They paid off pretty much all that money. They developed new models. They increased their market share both in the United States and internationally. And so while free market is generally a good idea, but in cases when your particular important industry is in trouble, it may not be such a bad idea, at least that many economists believe, to support that industry for a brief period of time to let them go through those difficult times with hopes that they will emerge as stronger and meaner and leaner and more competitive. And yes, here is a joke note: you may not outsource your homework to India, because again, sometimes outsourcing is not about getting the best deal, the most efficient way to get the job done, but sometimes you actually have to learn it yourself so that tomorrow you will be stronger. So sure, yes, China can now make electrical vehicles cheaper and better than the United States can. But if we ever want to learn how to make those things ourselves, maybe we should impose some protectionist measures there. And I'm not necessarily advocating those policies, but I see some logic in those statements or people who propose those policies. Now remember at the beginning of the lecture I quoted Paul Krugman, who said that in the international trade context, countries are much more like people and much less like companies. If we were talking about international trade as about people, people who would say, or those who say that imports or job outsourcing should be completely banned, would be pretty much saying the same thing as you would be forcing, let's say, your father or yourself to make everything you need on your own. Essentially would be saying, you know what, father, I see, or you know what, John, whoever, you know, you, student, you know why you are underemployed? Because you outsource too much work to other people. For example, somebody else bakes your bread, somebody else makes your pens, somebody else makes your car, paints your house, and so on and so on and so on. Outsourcing is bad because it keeps you underemployed. From tomorrow, you're going to be making all that stuff on your own. You want some bread, you make the dough, you make your own bread. You want new jeans, well, go grow the cotton, make the fabric, and make your own jeans. You need a new car, well, go and build your own new car. Obviously, that will keep you busy and that will keep you employed, but will that make you better off? And I'm telling you, I mean, obviously I don't have to tell you, no, it will not make you better off. It will just make you more employed or work more hours, but it will not maximize your wealth. Well, it's the same thing with the countries. When we say that the United States, for example, should make everything by on its own because, you know, outsourcing to China is bad, well, we may end up like that guy in the example that I just gave you. Yes, the United States can probably make its own little, you know, toys and whatever else they buy. But I'm telling you, that's probably not going to make America wealthier and better off. America should allow its companies, its people, to focus on what's most effective for them, what's most profitable for them. And if a company, after some calculations, decide that making stuff in China is more profitable for them, then be it. The same thing with the people. I mean, if you calculate that people you employ are not generating the maximum value for you, and you as an American can make more money as an entrepreneur by outsourcing production to, for example, China and focusing on design and engineering, so be it. Nobody should force you to do it otherwise. Now here is a video from the presidential campaign, and so as you may remember, Donald Trump at some time said that he would be competing with Obama for the presidential office.
The top story tonight, Donald Trump for president, looks like he might run. New Harris Internet poll out today says 10% of Americans would vote for Mr. Trump, and that ties him with Mitt Romney in the lead for the Republican sweepstakes. But is Donald Trump really up to the job? Here we go. All right, let's start with the big issue in the 2012 presidential race, jobs. Why haven't jobs come back as fast as many people thought they should?
Because they're going to China. China is taking our jobs, they're making our product, and we have to do something about it, and we have to do something about it quickly. They are decimating our country just as OPEC is decimating our country with their oil prices.
But how can you compete with Chinese labor, which is much, much less than unionized American labor? I mean, what are you going to make a law that says you can't, American companies can't manufacture in China? You're going to make a law?
By getting China not to manipulate their currency. It's very tough for our companies to compete with Chinese companies because, very simply, they manipulate their currency. And when you manipulate a currency like they do, they're professionals at it.
Well, how are you going to do that? The Chinese are going to say, we're going to do what we want, and we don't care what you say.
You're going to do something very simple, Bill. 25% tax on China unless they behave.
Now, as much as I like Donald Trump and sympathize with the Republican Party, well, I'm not a huge fan, but I see some good things in the Republican ideology. What Donald Trump said in this video actually makes no sense from the right, from the Republican point of view. As you know, Republicans are very much for the small government and the people deciding for themselves what to do. Well, what Donald Trump here is saying is just the opposite. He says, it sounds like he's saying things about China, that China should be put back in place, you know, let's impose that 20% or 25% import tariff on China. But effectively what he's saying is, you Americans are stupid because you buy Chinese goods. We cannot trust you with that choice, so what we're going to do, we're going to, as the government, impose a tariff and make Chinese goods artificially more expensive, so that when you come to store tomorrow, the Chinese good was more expensive for you, so more, that you will be pretty much forced to buy an American good because the Chinese will not make much sense. I will make the choice for you because based on the price, you're making the wrong choice. So I'll make that choice for you. I will adjust the price. That is, will increase the Chinese price by 25% so that you could finally make the choice that I, the government, want you to make. And that doesn't make much sense to me. I mean, first of all, it's not a freedom of choice. It's not what the Republican Party stands on. If you belong to that party, I mean, you would be the first one to criticize Donald Trump or whoever else who says that. But again, if you are like me, if you don't belong to any party, if you simply care about the economic feasibility of the policies, then again, look at what he's saying. I mean, I'm not even getting into the fact that China would retaliate and all those iPads, Boeings, airplanes, Caterpillar, tractors and combines that are currently sold in China by American companies. I'm sure China would impose the same import tariffs on American goods, and those companies will lose big time, huge time. But again, even let's assume China will not retaliate. Just think about the whole proposal. It's definitely not free economy. It's definitely not the American way, and it's not the way that helps America. So essentially what we're dealing here with, if I may use the same example I used before, is if we have the United States, a nation of educated people that is currently unemployed, with the unemployment rate up to 10%, previous experience it was leader in manufacturing, and now we see that manufacturing jobs have left to Asia, let's say to China, and the United States wants to be a leader in the new age sector. What advice would you give to this country? Well, Donald Trump says, I'm going to impose an import tariff on Chinese goods, and by doing so, I will help America. Well, if we compare America to John Smith, again, a hypothetical example, a person just like America, who is, let's say, an educated programmer, right? The guy who writes code, programming code. Let's say he's unemployed like America. Let's say he had a good job 25 years ago as a programmer for IBM, but now is unemployed and works only 20 hours a week. And his aspiration is to become a well-paid, IT engineer in the future. So if you were to follow Donald Trump's advice, what you would say to John is this: John, your problem is that you outsource or buy too many services from others. So from now on, I'm going to force you to pay extra 25% on any product that you buy from others. So you go to buy your new pens, it's going to cost you 25% more. So you don't make that choice so that you decide to make it yourself. You want to buy a car, well, if it's a car from Mexico, it's going to cost you 25% more because you make a stupid choice. You buy a Mexican car, not an American one. And so on and so on and so on and so on. So from tomorrow, you're going to cook your food, make your clothes, make your transportation, and build your own house and do everything else by yourself. Now, will that make much sense for John? I mean, obviously, as far as working hours, he'll probably work 24/7 now in order to survive. But will he be better off? I don't think so. So if you wouldn't give that advice to a person, why would you give that advice to America? Because the advice we would probably give to John is, John, you know what? Your problem is probably lack of competitiveness. There are all those other people who seem to be better than you and they get in that job. You gotta lose some weight, you gotta train, you gotta get smarter. So maybe you should go back to school and train. Maybe you should work harder. And yes, I know you don't have much money. In fact, you have a huge debt. But if you just sit at home and whine and try to do everything you need, and make everything you need on your own, it's not going to get you out of your debt. Maybe you should consider going back to school, even if it means getting more into debt. But after a few years of extra training, or maybe a few months, depending on what school you choose, you will actually emerge as more in debt, but with more skills. And that may allow you to actually do better in the long perspective. So again, think about that a little bit as US students, and hopefully it will give you a different perspective on job outsourcing and international trade, right? And this is basically what I just said. Now, I would like to conclude with this video about American companies making big bucks in China. I know that in the United States, most people believe that these days it's only China selling to the United States. The truth is, no. There is a trade deficit, and it is true that China sells a little bit more to the United States than the United States sells to China. But it's not like this. It's both countries sell huge amounts of goods and services to one another. It's just the United States sells a little bit less. So, but it sells a lot, huge amounts of money. And if you take into the account that much of the American stuff sold in China, like for example those Chevy trucks and cars and Nike things, they are sold there by American companies, but they are made in China and therefore are not counted as American imports, then actually America is probably selling in China, or the Chinese people pay much more for products of American companies than Americans pay for products of Chinese companies. So watch this short video and
Sam's Club is drumming up business in the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou. This store opening marks the 173rd in China for parent company Walmart in just 13 years. The enthusiasm for spending money here is pulling this U.S. company and many more through the global recession. It's American Products Day. The store's 10,000 customers are celebrating, snapping up U.S. brands from vitamins to laundry detergent. Clearly, capitalism's a hit in communist China. Older generations still save half their paychecks, but that trend's reversing as a nation of young shopaholics is born. Salaries for young urban Chinese have almost tripled in less than a decade, from $858 to $2,300 a month. But people in their 20s and 30s save next to nothing. Instead, they're on a spending spree. The best indicator? The number of credit cards is exploding, from 13 million cards in 2005 to 180 million now. American businesses are riding high on the buying boom thanks to people like Zhao Mengyao. She drives a Buick, chats on an iPhone, eats at McDonald's, and wears Nike. Brands are really important to me, and then I look at the price tag, she explains.
It seems that every major American company is digging its way into China. Caterpillar's had a bumpy ride because of the U.S. recession, but in China, its revenues have grown from $700,000 in 2005 to $2.6 billion this year.
The NBA's 30,000 Chinese retail spots are selling 60% more merchandise this year than last.
Nike entered China early back in 1980, and now it's the country's #1 sports brand. Revenues went up 22% in China this year, in comparison to just 2% in the U.S.
KFC and Pizza Hut are also feeding Chinese appetites faster than ever before. They're opening up 1 or 2 restaurants a day in China.
We think this is the best growth opportunity in the 21st century and maybe even beyond.
But perhaps no one's as thankful for China's big spenders as General Motors. The company faced bankruptcy earlier this year in the U.S., but it's never been hotter here, where first-time drivers are still excited to get behind the wheel of a brand-new American car. Still, experts caution it's just as hard for U.S. companies to succeed in China as it is back home.
If you are ready to operate in an environment that is chaotic, that is brutal, but that has real opportunity, that's when you should come over here. But don't come over here with candy corn dreams about some beautiful pot of gold that awaits you here.
Getting that pot of gold requires work, but American companies that haven't expanded to China may regret missing out on the great Chinese shopping spree. Celia Hatton, CBS News, Beijing.
Finally, I would like to conclude with one quick statement that sometimes job outsourcing is actually pure bad and maybe even evil. Sometimes jobs are outsourced and factories are moved overseas not because it's more economically feasible to make that stuff there, but because it's cheaper to violate the law there. I've been to China recently, and actually a number of times, but particularly on the recent trip, and the country is extremely polluted. I was kind of looking at the country, not only as a tourist, but maybe one day I want to move there and maybe teach there for a few years. But no, it's so polluted, at least Beijing, that I don't think I want to live there. And it seems to me that many companies go to China not necessarily because it's cheaper to hire Chinese employees, but because in China you can get away with more, particularly with respect to environment pollution. So you can dump whatever you want in that atmosphere there or in the rivers there. And first, the laws are much more relaxed. But even if you break the law, it seems like a bribe of a few $1 million can solve all your problems. Whereas here in the United States, you would definitely go to jail. And so when the outsourcing is done for the reasons not the purely economic reasons, but for the reasons that it's kind of makes more economic sense to violate the law there because it's cheaper to violate the law there, then yes, I cannot justify that kind of outsourcing. All right? And it's time for the popular answer. When people think about the rows of trees, they immediately imagine a picture like this. But as I said before, the rows don't have to be parallel. For example, they can be planted like this. 1 row of trees, 2 rows of trees, 3, 4, and 5. You have 5 rows of trees here and only 10 trees total. Ta-da! Here is your answer. Right? The same thing political, and that's from a different perspective. Sometimes politicians would be advocating banning job outsourcing, but again, not because it makes more economic sense, but that's because what their constituencies want. For example, they run from a little town where there is only one factory, and that factory happened to be outsourced to Mexico. And so obviously in that town, the rhetorics along the lines of, outsourcing is bad, let's impose a 50% import tariff on Mexican-made goods. In that particular town, that would be a popular message, and you can be re-elected or elected. But then would it be good for American economy, for the American economy as the whole? It would be good for that one factory, but would it make much sense for the whole country? Well, everybody else will be paying much more for those products. So it would be basically, rather than protecting American jobs, it would be protecting those several jobs in that particular geographic location at the expense of everybody else, including you and me. And so the question is that the right policy? And if you look at it that way, I bet many of you will kind of scratch your back and think, scratch your head and think, I don't know, maybe it's not, right? Sometimes also it's kind of funny, like I understand when you buy things like iPods and perfumes from overseas. But when you have a product like this, and I took this picture in my gym, it's as simple as it gets, and it's very expensive to move, but it's not very expensive to buy. So it's basically a piece of iron. And so this dumbbell here was made in China, and I was very surprised to see that somebody would actually pay for transportation of this heavy thing from China to the United States. whereas I'm sure it could have been done in the United States. Though it's possible that the profit margins on this stuff is so low that the factories that make steel products can make much more on making, I don't know, steel for cars and maybe rockets. And so they just don't want to waste their energy on making these rough dumbbells. Anyway, this is what you need to know on the exam. And yes, thank you for your attention. Good luck with take-home assignment number 1, and bye.
We're going to take another look tonight at so many American jobs that are moving overseas. We started with it yesterday and pointed out they're heading to China, Taiwan, the Philippines, and to India, countries where the skills are high and the wages are low. The most coveted of these jobs appear to be going to India, where American companies are taking advantage of the world's fastest growing white-collar workforce. Here's ABC's Mark Litke.
The chaotic streets of Bombay, a long way from home for Californian Dave Weil, but at his new accounting firm here, he's just a keystroke away. His 300-plus employees work around the clock, organizing and inputting data for hundreds of U.S. clients.
We can do work with English-speaking professionals as good or better than would be done by people in the United States, and of course for a fraction of the cost. I'm going to help you out today.
First, it was call centers, thousands of Indian-based operators providing tech support, airline reservations, and bank transactions. Now, it's almost anything that can be transmitted via the internet. Software development, research, engineering. The Indian firm Wipro, with 30,000 employees, now even provides cutting-edge healthcare services. These are MRI images from an American heart patient at Massachusetts General Hospital, sent over the internet to India, where Wipro radiologists create three-dimensional images, analyze them, and transmit them back to Boston. This could take several days in the U.S. Here, it takes 12 hours and costs roughly half the price. But while outsourcing to India has been very good for the bottom line of some U.S. companies, very few want to talk about it in an American election year, in which jobs have become a major issue. Every major U.S. company we approached here refused to let us in the door. They were concerned about negative publicity, since their Indian workers now enjoy the benefits of what were once considered very secure American jobs.
Are you worried about India bashing? Yeah, we'll see bashing, we'll see some blips, but ultimately this trend is here to stay.
Which is why Dave Weil expects to make a fortune providing a unique service for his American customers.
We prepare U.S. income tax returns.
That's right, 25,000 1040s this year and counting. And while U.S. accountants may now scream about losing jobs to India, Weil doesn't hear U.S. taxpayers complaining about having their returns done faster and for less money. Mark Litke, ABC News, Bombay.
The old symbols are still there. The monuments, the uniforms, even the red flag. But on the streets of today's China, there's a growing number of new icons Mao Zedong never dreamed of, with prestigious names like Rolex, Louis Vuitton, and Buick. That's right, Buick. Look anywhere in China, and there they are. Buick sedans, Buick station wagons, even Buick police cars.
What would Chairman Mao think? 6 decades after the Communist Revolution, China has become the hottest capitalist engine on earth. And ironically, some of the most revered symbols of success in today's China are Cadillac, Buick, and Chevrolet.
In 2007, General Motors sold nearly twice as many Buicks in China as it did in the U.S., more than 330,000. In this part of the world, your grandfather's stodgy old car is actually hip. General Motors may be struggling at home, but it is thriving here.
Growing so fast is not easy, but it's better than shrinking, I promise you.
It's thanks in large part to GM Chairman and CEO Rick Wagner.
Hey, Rick.
Phil, how are you?
Ready to take a ride through the streets of Beijing?
Well, let's go do it.
All right,
yeah,
let's do it.
Should be good.
We joined Wagner on a recent trip to China and found him awestruck by the country's economic vitality.
How much different is driving through Beijing than it was in 1996?
Yeah, I mean, like unbelievably different. In a way, it's like, I don't know what it is, 30, 40, 50 years of progress in 12 years. It's like things run here at triple time.
In 1997, Wagner and his then boss, Jack Smith, made a gamble, betting $1.5 billion GM could build and sell cars in China. It was a big risk, partnering with a once hostile communist government in a country moving mostly on bicycles. But Wagner believed the Chinese were ready to trade 2 wheels for 4, and he wanted GM along for the ride.
Back in 96, I mean, how do you sell people on the idea? It was still considered a gamble.
Yeah, I mean, back in 1997, the Chinese market was about 1.5 million units. We sold about 60,000. So I don't think, to be fair, anyone could see the extent of the potential.
Wagner's hunch was that 1.4 billion Chinese, long denied access to Western goods, would be starving for legendary brands like Buick, Cadillac, and Chevrolet. He was right. Just ask Zhao Chengyi. Zhao Cheng is a 36-year-old businessman from Shanghai province. This is a big day for him. He and his brother have just traveled 3 hours to this Chevy dealership in Shanghai to buy his very first car, a brand new Chevy Aveo.
Why did you pick Chevrolet?
I saw Chevrolet is very heavily used. I saw a lot of them on the streets.
Do most Chinese people like Chevrolet?
Chevrolet has very good quality, and quality is very important for Chinese.